This is the Sony Xperia 1 and this is my full review of the device. So this is the Sony Xperia 1. Now this is quite a different device. When you look at your normal devices, all the phones use the same aspect ratio. Now with the Sony Xperia 1, it comes with a tall 21:9 ratio display. And this allows for much easier one-handed use, but also for beautiful cinematic views of movies and so on. But for me, mostly I felt like the one-handed use was the thing this benefited the most upon. It allowed me to easily control the device, and the software also is properly integrated for this, with you easily pulling down the settings and pulling up for the app drawer. Now while it's easier for one-handed use, when of course you need to be on top of the screen, some jiggling is of course needed. And while we are on the subject of the top of the display, with the Sony Xperia 1 there are no cutouts, no notches, nothing. With the Sony Xperia 1 you will get more top bezel, and that houses the sensors but also the camera and speakers. And while we are talking about the display, this is a beautiful display. It has really nice colors and it just pops. Sony really nailed the display here, even though I think 4K HDR is a bit overboard. For a screen size like this, I'm not complaining. And then in terms of power, it comes of course with the latest and greatest, meaning a Snapdragon 855, 6GB of RAM and 128GB of base storage, which you can expand via the microSD. Simply put, this can fight against other big boys without a problem, even more so with day-to-day use. However, the Sony Xperia 1 does need more power management, because the 3330 mAh battery isn't a long runner, it's more a sprinter. While it can last through the day, in some cases when I film more and take more pictures, it can run out of juice before it. But while we are on the subject of taking pictures and videos, let's discuss this part. Now while for video you can of course record via the standard camera app, you do have a free included app called Cinema Pro, where you can freely play around with the settings of video recording with manual controls to properly optimize the video. The only company that comes to mind that allows this much manual control is LG when it comes to video recording. But then there are some things we have to talk about with video and pictures being taken on this device, because the Sony Xperia 1 does have its issues. For instance, when it comes to video recording, it just has too many drop frames when it comes to the standard camera app, where the video simply doesn't look smooth, and with the Snapdragon 855 this simply shouldn't be something you expect from a device like this. While in the Cinema Pro app this is mostly removed, the simple question is, why do I even have this problem? And then with its triple camera setup with 3 30MP cameras, with a normal shot, a super wide angle shot and of course a telephoto shot, it does have some issues, starting with switching between those different optics. You have to press 2 times when you want to get to the wide angle, for instance, while they could have simply given us 3 options to switch between easily. But also next to that, it has some exposure issues. I get that there are without a doubt people that buy this device knowing they will need to work on those shots themselves, but it baffles me that they simply cannot have that done better from the get-go. But with that being said, it isn't all negative when it comes to the camera. The Sony Xperia 1 can create some beautiful shots with beautiful natural colors and not too much saturations where others love to do so. And this can result in pictures that are far more enjoyed on the Sony Xperia 1 versus for instance the Samsung Galaxy S10. Even more so when the sun is slowly coming down. Sunset shots on this device are stunning. The manual mode also adjusts for it and makes some beautiful shots. Where again, for instance, on the S10 it is overprocessed. The shots simply don't hold a candle against it. But for me the biggest issue is with low light. This is even when it detects the scene as a low light scene, or when I use manual HDR, it simply doesn't hold up that well. Where light sources aren't dealt with properly, but also the shot itself in general doesn't look that good. And while this phone might be aimed for people who like to play with more manual settings, there is no reason for this phone that it shouldn't perform well in automatic. Not to mention that HDR shouldn't be hidden on the manual, because manual doesn't allow you to use those 3 different optics. It just allows you to use the one camera. So honestly, if you care about the camera and don't want to play around with settings, this might not be the one for you. So the Sony Xperia 1, I find this an interesting device. I think the display is beautiful and the one-handed use is much nicer on a device like this. However, in turn it does have its issues, and I hope Sony manages to work and improve on those, because the more competition, the better it is for us consumers. But at the end, because of the lack of a headphone jack and of course the camera app itself, this isn't a device for me. So this was my take on the Sony Xperia 1. Do you own the device? And if so, tell me your experience in the comments below. And of course, as always, have a good one, and if you enjoy my work, don't forget to leave a like and of course subscribe.